Fate didn't eliminate you. Family did.
Nothing quite prepares you for the moment your life gets torched at your own victory party. Picture this. You're standing on a Manhattan rooftop, champagne glass in hand, watching your company's IPO numbers scroll across the digital billboard like lottery winnings. $500 million. From nothing to $500 million in 15 years. The American dream, right? Wrong. Because sometimes the American dream is just a setup for the American nightmare. The first sign should have been my wife Sarah's smile. Too wide, too perfect. Like she was posing for photographers who weren't there. She stood next to my younger brother Jake, both of them glowing under the city lights. And something about the way they kept glancing at each other made my stomach twist. But hey, I'm a paranoid fool, always have been. Comes with the territory when you claw your way up from Queens to Park Avenue. Ladies and gentlemen, my father's voice cut through the rooftop chatter like a rusty blade. Richard Blackstone. 72 years old, still sharp enough to gut a fish, and arrogant enough to think he invented the ocean. Tonight we celebrate not just an IPO, but a changing of the guard. The crowd turned toward him. Investors, board members, society types, who wouldn't have pissed on me if I was on fire 10 years ago. Now they hung on every word, because money has a way of making people forget where you came from. My son has built something remarkable here, Dad continued, and for exactly 3 seconds, I felt proud. Then he smiled that shark smile I knew too well. Which is why I'm thrilled to announce that effective immediately, Jake will be taking over as CEO of Blackstone Properties. The champagne glass slipped from my fingers. I watched it fall in slow motion, crystal exploding against Italian marble, while my entire world collapsed around me. The crowd applauded. Some a-hole even whistled. Furthermore, Dad's voice grew louder, feeding off the crowd's energy. I'm delighted to share that Jake and Sarah have just gotten engaged. Sarah held up her left hand. A diamond, the size of a marble, caught the light. My grandmother's ring. The one I'd specifically asked for when I proposed to her 6 years ago. The one Dad said was too good for a first marriage. Jake wrapped his arm around Sarah's waist. My wife, my brother, my company, my life. All handed over like a corporate merger, while I stood there like a tourist, watching someone else's parade. The crowd surged forward to congratulate them. I caught fragments of conversation as people pushed past me. Always knew Jake was the smart one. Sarah's such a catch. Poor Danny, but honestly, he never had the vision. Poor Danny. That's what I'd become in the space of 60 seconds. Poor freaking Danny. I turned and walked toward the exit, each step feeling like I was walking through quicksand. Behind me, the party continued. Laughter, applause. The sound of my life being divided up like a estate sale. Danny, Sarah's voice called out. I didn't turn around. Danny, wait, but I was already gone. Down the elevator, through the lobby, onto the street where taxis honked and normal people lived in normal lives and nobody gave a crap about hostile takeovers disguised as family celebrations. I walked 20 blocks in a $2,000 suit, my mind racing. 15 years, 15 damn years I'd poured into Blackstone Properties, started with a single apartment building in Queens that nobody wanted, fixed it up myself. Painted walls, replaced pipes, dealt with tenants who couldn't afford to live anywhere decent. Built it into an empire while Jake was skiing in Aspen, and Sarah was shopping on Fifth Avenue with money I'd earned. By the time I reached my penthouse, I had a plan. Or at least the beginning of one. The office buzzed with Monday morning energy when I walked in at 7 a.m. My assistant Linda looked surprised to see me. Mr. Blackstone? I thought you might, given yesterday's announcement. Why would I take a day off, Linda? I've got work to do. She looked confused, but handed me my messages. 312 emails had piled up overnight. Half were congratulations for Jake. The other half were condolences for me. Corporate vultures circling the corpse. I was reviewing quarterly reports when they walked in. Jake and Sarah both wearing expressions of fake concern. Jake had on one of those suits that cost more than most people's cars, tailored to hide the fact that he'd never done an honest day's work in his life. Sarah wore a black dress that probably cost what I used to make in a month back in Queens. They looked like they were attending my funeral. Danny, Sarah said, her voice dripping with sympathy. We need to talk. Sure. My office or the conference room? Actually, Jake interrupted, I think my office would be more appropriate. His office. The one that had been mine since I built this company from scratch. The one with my awards on the walls and my furniture and my damn coffee maker. Lead the way, boss, I said. Jake's smile faltered. Good. Let him remember that underneath all the charm and designer clothes, I was still the guy who'd broken his nose when we were 12 and he'd stolen my bicycle. We walked down the hallway in silence. Employees stopped talking as we passed. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked excited, like they were watching a reality show play out in real time. The dynamics had shifted overnight, and everyone was recalibrating their loyalties. Jake's new office looked exactly like my old one, except my personal items had been boxed up and placed on the desk. 15 years of my life reduced to 3 cardboard boxes. I know this is awkward, Jake began, settling into the chair behind the desk. My desk. But we want to make this transition as smooth as possible. How thoughtful of you both. Sarah perched on the edge of the desk, her engagement ring catching the morning light. She was beautiful, I'd give her that. The kind of beautiful that made smart men do stupid things. Long auburn hair, green eyes, legs that went on for miles. I'd fallen for her at a charity gala 5 years ago, and apparently, so had my brother. The board has asked me to handle your severance package personally, Jake continued. We're prepared to offer you a very generous settlement. How generous? $2 million, plus benefits through the end of the year. I laughed, actually laughed. $2 million? For a company I built that's worth $500 million? You'll also need to sign a non-compete agreement, Sarah added, and a confidentiality clause. There it was. They wanted to buy my silence. Pay me to disappear quietly while they enjoyed the fruits of my labor. You know what's funny? I leaned back in my chair. I always wondered what it would feel like to lose everything. Turns out it's liberating. Jake frowned. Danny, be reasonable. This is business. Business? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline I'd helped reshape. Let me tell you about business, little brother. Business is when you spend 15 years working 18-hour days while your family enjoys the profits. Business is when your wife screws your brother behind your back for 2 years while pretending to love you. Business is when your father hands over everything you built to his favorite son because he's embarrassed that the family success story came from the wrong kid. The room went dead silent. Sarah's face had gone pale. That's not, she started. 2 years, Sarah. I know about the hotel receipts, the credit card charges, the little weekend trips to the Hamptons while I was working. Did you think I was stupid? Jake stood up, his face flushed. You're out of line, Danny. Am I? Or am I finally in line for the first time in my damn life? I walked over to the desk and picked up one of my boxes. You want to know what's really funny? I always thought family meant something. Loyalty, trust. But I've learned something valuable this week. When people show you who they really are, believe them. I headed for the door, then stopped. Oh, and Jake? You might want to check the company's liquidity position. I noticed some irregularities in the accounts over the weekend. Probably nothing, but you know how these things can snowball if you're not careful. His face went from flushed to white in about 3 seconds. What are you talking about? I'm sure it's nothing. You're the CEO now. Figure it out. I walked out, carrying my boxes past the staring employees, into the elevator, and out of the building that had been my life for 15 years. In the cab, I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app for our emergency fund. The one Jake didn't know about. The one that contained $3 million in cash and another $10 million in bearer bonds. Sometimes it pays to be paranoid. My apartment felt different that night. Emptier. Like Sarah had taken more than just her clothes when she moved out. She'd taken the warmth, the sense of home, the illusion that I had a life beyond work. I poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey and sat in my leather chair, the same one I'd been sitting in 6 months ago when I'd decided to propose to Sarah. God, what a fool I'd been. 38 years old, successful beyond my wildest dreams, and desperate to prove I was worthy of love. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built an empire trying to win my father's approval, married a beautiful woman trying to prove I deserved her, and been loyal to a brother who'd been plotting against me for years. Classic Danny Blackstone, always fighting the last war. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Danny, I know you're hurt, but we need to talk. There are things you don't understand. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. There would be time for talking later. Right now, I had work to do. I opened my laptop and logged into the company's financial systems. My access hadn't been revoked yet, probably an oversight on Jake's part. He'd always been sloppy with details, preferring to let other people handle the boring stuff while he played golf and networked at charity events. It took me about an hour to find what I was looking for. A pattern of unusual transactions over the past 6 months. Money moving from development accounts into a private investment fund. Nothing illegal technically, but definitely questionable. Especially when I traced the fund back to a shell company owned by Jake's college roommate. I downloaded the files and saved them to an encrypted drive. Then I started making phone calls. The first call was to Marcus Chen, a forensic accountant I'd used for due diligence on acquisitions. The second was to Jennifer Walsh, a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud. The third was to Tommy Ricci, my oldest friend and the only person in the world I trusted completely. Tommy answered on the second ring. Danny, Jesus, I heard about the IPO party. You okay? Define okay. That bad? Worse. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I need your help with something. Tommy had been my first employee when I started the company. Back then, he was doing construction work, and I was fixing up that apartment building in Queens. We'd worked side by side for months, learning the business together, dreaming about what we could build if we just worked hard enough. While I'd moved into the boardroom, Tommy had stayed in the field. He ran our construction operations now, managed crews, dealt with suppliers. He was the kind of guy who knew where all the bodies were buried because he'd helped dig the holes. Whatever you need, boss. You know that. I might not be the boss much longer. Nonsense. You built this company. Jake's just keeping the chair warm until you come back. I wished I shared his optimism. But Tommy had always been loyal to a fault. It was one of the things I valued most about him, and one of the things that made him terrible at office politics. Listen, Tommy. Things are about to get complicated. I need you to trust me, and I need you to be careful who you talk to. You're scaring me, Danny. Good. You should be scared. We all should be. The next morning, I met Tommy at a diner in Queens, not far from where we'd first started working together. He looked older than his 42 years, weathered by decades of construction work, but his eyes were still sharp. You look like hell, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. Thanks. You always know just what to say. The waitress brought us coffee without being asked. The kind of place where they remembered how you liked your eggs, even if you hadn't been there in years. So what's this about? Tommy asked. I slid a manila folder across the table. Take a look. He opened it and whistled low. Jesus, Danny. Where did you get this? Company records, all perfectly legal to access, at least until they revoke my passwords. The folder contained financial records showing Jake's creative accounting over the past 6 months. Not enough to land him in jail, but definitely enough to raise questions with the board and the SEC. What are you going to do with it? Nothing yet, but I want you to have a copy, just in case something happens to me. Tommy looked alarmed. What the heck does that mean? It means my brother and my wife just stole my life and they're not going to get away with it. I explained what I discovered, how the pieces fit together, how they'd been planning this for months while I'd been working to make the IPO successful. The more I talked, the angrier Tommy got. Those freaking snakes, he said when I finished. After everything you've done for them, Jake wouldn't know how to run a lemonade stand without you. Maybe. But he's got the board's support and Dad's backing. That counts for a lot in this business. So, what's the plan? I smiled for the first time in days. The plan is to remind everyone why they should never underestimate a guy from Queens. The plan started small. A few strategic phone calls to suppliers, questioning whether the new management would honor existing contracts. A conversation with the bank about irregular account activity. Nothing actionable, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. By Thursday, Jake was calling me every hour. I let it go to voicemail. Danny, we need to talk. There are rumors flying around about financial irregularities. The board is asking questions. Call me back. I didn't call back. Instead, I had lunch with Jennifer Walsh, the private investigator. Jennifer was in her 40s, a former FBI agent who'd gone private after getting tired of government bureaucracy. She had the kind of face that could disappear in a crowd, and the kind of mind that could piece together patterns other people missed. Your wife and brother have been busy, she said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. Hotel receipts going back 18 months, credit card records, phone logs, even some photos. I opened the envelope and immediately wished I hadn't. Sarah and Jake at dinner. Sarah and Jake walking hand in hand through Central Park. Sarah and Jake kissing in the lobby of the Plaza Hotel. The affair started 2 years ago, Jennifer continued, but the business planning is more recent. About 6 months ago, they started meeting regularly with your father and some board members, always at private clubs, always off the record. They've been planning this for 6 months? At least. There are also some interesting financial moves. Your wife has been quietly liquidating assets, moving money into accounts your brother controls. She's been very careful, but not careful enough. I felt sick. 2 years of lies. 2 years of coming home to a woman who was planning to destroy me while she kissed me goodnight. There's more, Jennifer said. Your brother has been feeding information to competitors. Development plans, bid amounts, strategic initiatives. Nothing traceable, but the pattern is clear. That's corporate espionage. Hard to prove, but yes, technically. I closed the envelope and slid it into my briefcase. How much do I owe you? This one's on the house. I don't like cheaters, and I really don't like thieves. That night, I called Jake back. He answered on the first ring. Danny, thank God. Where have you been? The board is going crazy. There are rumors about financial irregularities, questions about my qualifications. What the hell's going on? Sounds stressful. How's married life? Silence. Then, Danny, we need to meet. Face to face. Fine. Your office tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. Thank you. And Danny, whatever problems we have, we're still family. Yes, we are. See you tomorrow, brother. I hung up and poured myself another whiskey. Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. I'd spent my whole life trying to be a good son, a good brother, a good husband. And where had it gotten me? Betrayed. Humiliated. Cast aside like an outdated piece of equipment. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. Treated me like the same scrappy kid from Queens who used to beg for their approval. They forgot that the kid from Queens had grown up to be a man who'd built a $500 million empire from nothing. And what one man builds, he can tear down. I arrived at the office early Friday morning, before the security guards changed shifts. Being CEO for 15 years teaches you things like guard schedules and access codes and where all the important files are kept. Jake's new office still smelled like my cologne. He'd kept most of my furniture, probably couldn't be bothered to redecorate. Sarah was there too, wearing a blue dress that I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. The little touches of cruelty that separated amateurs from professionals. Danny, sit down, Jake said. We need to clear the air. The air seems fine to me. Little thin, but that's probably just the altitude up here in the executive suite. Sarah rolled her eyes. Can we skip the sarcasm and talk like adults? Sure. Let's talk about adults. Like how adults don't screw their husband's brother for 2 years while planning a corporate coup. Jake's face went red. That's enough, Danny. Is it? Because I'm just getting started. I opened my briefcase and pulled out Jennifer's envelope. Want to see some pictures from your romantic getaways? The plaza has excellent security cameras. I spread the photos across the desk like I was dealing cards. Sarah's face went white. Jake stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. And where did you get those? I'm a wealthy man getting divorced, Jake. I can afford good private investigators. Want to see the bank records, the hotel receipts? The phone logs showing 200 calls between you two while I was working 90-hour weeks to make the IPO successful. Sarah found her voice. Danny, you don't understand. We didn't want it to happen this way. No? How did you want it to happen? A different hotel, better lighting for the photos? Jake was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. This is a disaster. If the board sees these dots. Oh, they're not seeing these. Yet. But they are getting curious about other things. Like why our development fund has been bleeding money into Jake's personal investment accounts. Like why our competitors always seem to know our bid amounts before we submit them. Like why the new CEO's first act was to give himself a $4 million bonus. That bonus was approved by the board, Jake said weakly. After you provided them with projected earnings that included deals I negotiated and contracts I signed. Funny how you forgot to mention that. I stood up and walked to the window. Down on the street, people were rushing to work, caught up in their own problems and ambitions. None of them knew that 40 floors above them, an empire was about to burn. Here's what's going to happen, I said, turning back to them. You're going to call an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. You're going to explain that you've reconsidered your decision to take over the company. You're going to recommend that I be reinstated as CEO, and you're going to publicly apologize for the confusion. Jake laughed. Actually laughed. Are you insane? Dad will never agree to that. Dad doesn't have a choice. See, while you two were playing house, I was playing chess. I own 30% of the company outright, another 15% through shell companies, and I've got proxy votes from investors who trust me more than they trust you. That gives me control. The laughter died on Jake's lips. You're bluffing. Am I? Want to test me? Because I've got nothing left to lose, Jake. My wife is gone. My family has betrayed me. My company has been stolen. I'm a man with no attachments and a lot of money and a serious grudge. Do you really want to find out what I'm capable of? Sarah stepped forward. Danny, please. We can work this out. We can all get what we want. What I want is simple, Sarah. I want my company back. I want you both to disappear from my life. And I want everyone to know exactly what kind of people you really are. You'll destroy us, she whispered. Yes, I will. The only question is how much collateral damage there'll be. I packed up the photos and headed for the door. Board meeting Monday morning, 10 o'clock. Don't disappoint me. The weekend passed slowly. I spent Saturday in my apartment, going through old photos and memories, deciding what was worth keeping and what should be thrown away. Most of the pictures with Sarah went in the trash. The ones with Jake, too. By Sunday evening, I'd reduced 15 years of relationships to a single box. Sunday night, my phone rang. Dad. Danny, we need to talk. Hello to you too, Dad. This isn't a joke. Jake told me about your little ultimatum. You're making a mistake. The mistake was trusting you, all of you. You're my son too, Danny. I raised you. I taught you everything you know about business. No, you taught me everything I know about betrayal. There's a difference. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. Richard Blackstone wasn't used to being challenged by his children. He'd ruled our family like a king for 70 years, dividing and conquering, playing favorites, keeping everyone desperate for his approval. If you go through with this, you'll destroy the family. The family destroyed itself the day you decided Jake was more worthy of my work than I was. Jake has qualities you lack: vision, charisma, social connections. Jake has never worked an honest day in his life. Jake couldn't run a hot dog stand without me there to count the change. And Jake has been stealing from the company while screwing my wife. Silence. Then, you can prove that? Every penny, every lie, every betrayal. I've got enough evidence to bury him so deep he'll need GPS to find daylight. What do you want, Danny? Justice. And if I can't have justice, I'll settle for revenge. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of November day that makes you remember winter's coming, whether you're ready for it or not. I dressed carefully, my best suit, lucky cufflinks, the tie Sarah had given me for my birthday. I wanted to look perfect for what might be the most important meeting of my life. The boardroom was full when I walked in. Dad at the head of the table, Jake to his right, Sarah sitting in the corner like she belonged there. The board members looked uncomfortable, like they'd been dragged to a family intervention. Gentlemen, I said, taking my seat, thank you for coming. Let's get this over with, Dad said. Jake, explain to your brother why his demands are unreasonable. Jake stood up, but before he could speak, I opened my briefcase and started laying out documents, financial records, hotel receipts, private investigator photos, bank statements, phone logs. 2 years of evidence spread across the mahogany table like a roadmap to hell. Before Jake explains anything, I said, I think the board should see what kind of leadership they're endorsing. The room went dead silent. Board members leaned forward to examine the documents. I watched their faces change as they realized what they were looking at. Jesus Christ, whispered Harold Morrison, the longest-serving board member. Jake, is this true? Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Sarah had gone pale as paper. "It's not what it looks like," Jake finally managed. "Really?" I picked up a hotel receipt. "Because it looks like you've been having an affair with my wife while embezzling company funds to pay for your romantic getaways." "Those were legitimate business expenses," Jake said weakly. "Business expenses?" Harold held up a credit card statement. $2,400 at Victoria's Secret, $4,000 at Cartier. What kind of business were you conducting exactly? I stood up and walked to the front of the room, every eye following me. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you a story. 2 years ago, my brother and my wife began an affair. 6 months ago, they decided that affair wasn't enough. They wanted everything. So they hatched a plan." I pulled out a file folder. Step 1. Convince our father that Jake would be a better CEO than me. They did this by feeding him carefully selected financial data that made it look like Jake was responsible for our recent success. More documents hit the table. Like step 2, steal company funds to finance their affair and create a nest egg for their future together. They did this through a shell company that Jake controlled, moving money from development accounts that I didn't monitor closely. Step 3, sabotage my reputation by spreading rumors about my management style and my personal life. They did this through a coordinated campaign involving several board members who were promised significant positions in the new regime. I looked directly at Dad. Step 4, stage a public humiliation at the IPO party, announcing both the leadership change and their engagement simultaneously to maximize my embarrassment and minimize my ability to respond. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming. It was a good plan, thorough, well executed. It would have worked if they hadn't made one crucial mistake. "What mistake?" Dad asked quietly. "They forgot that I built this company. Every contract, every relationship, every strategic advantage we have exists because of me. They assumed they could just step into my shoes and everything would continue as before. But loyalty isn't inherited. Trust isn't transferable. And success isn't automatic." I walked back to my seat. Over the past week, I've been making phone calls, talking to suppliers, contractors, investors, city officials. Interesting conversations. It turns out that a lot of people are uncomfortable doing business with Jake. Something about his lack of experience and questionable judgment. Jake finally found his voice. "You've been sabotaging me. I've been exercising my right as a major shareholder to express concerns about company leadership. There's nothing illegal about that." "This is insane," Sarah said, speaking for the first time. "Danny, you're destroying everything we built together." "We?" I laughed. "What did you build, Sarah? What did you create? What did you contribute besides looking pretty at charity events and spending my money?" "I supported you. I was there for you. You were there, all right, every night lying next to me while you planned my destruction, every morning kissing me goodbye while you texted my brother. Every day, pretending to love me while you counted the days until you could get rid of me." I turned back to the board. "Gentlemen, you have a choice. You can continue to support leadership that has lied to you, stolen from you, and compromised the integrity of this company. Or you can vote to restore the management that built this empire in the first place." "And if we don't?" Harold asked. I smiled. "Then you'll find out what happens when someone with nothing left to lose decides to burn everything down." The vote was unanimous. Jake was out. I was back in. The next few months were a blur of 18-hour days and corporate warfare. Jake tried to fight the decision, hired lawyers, threatened lawsuits, even appealed directly to Dad. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the board's patience was exhausted. Sarah filed for divorce, demanding half of everything. I gave her the apartment, the house in the Hamptons, and $2 million in cash. It was more generous than she deserved. But I wanted her gone more than I wanted revenge. Jake moved to California, supposedly to start his own company. Last I heard, he was working for a mid-level development firm, making a fraction of what he'd been stealing from me. Dad and I barely spoke. He'd made his choice and I'd made mine. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. Tommy stayed loyal throughout everything, even when other employees were choosing sides, and the office felt like a war zone. He deserved better than to be caught in the middle of family drama, but he never complained. Now, you did what you had to do, he told me one Friday evening as we shared a beer in my office. They had it coming. Did they? Sometimes I wonder if I went too far. Nonsense. They tried to destroy you and you survived. That's not revenge, Danny. That's justice. Maybe he was right. Maybe justice and revenge were just different words for the same thing. Either way, I'd won. I had my company back, my reputation restored, my life under my control again. But victory felt different than I'd expected. Emptier. Like winning a war in a country you no longer wanted to live in. 2 years later, Blackstone Properties was stronger than ever. We'd expanded into 3 new markets, increased our portfolio by 40%, and our stock price had doubled. I was 40 years old, worth more money than I could spend in a lifetime, and completely alone. The penthouse felt like a museum. Perfect furniture, expensive art, stunning views, and no one to share them with. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious. It's hard to trust people when you've learned how easily trust can be weaponized. I was working late one Thursday evening when Linda knocked on my office door. "Mr. Blackstone, there's someone here to see you." "I don't have any appointments scheduled." "She says she's your sister-in-law." Former sister-in-law. Sarah walked into my office like she owned the place. She looked older, thinner, less polished than I remembered. Designer clothes, but not quite as expensive as before. Still beautiful, but with an edge of desperation that hadn't been there 2 years ago. "Hello, Danny." "Sarah, what do you want?" "To apologize and to explain." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm listening." She sat down across from my desk in the same chair where she'd sat 2 years ago when she'd helped Jake steal my life. "I know you hate me. You have every right to. What we did was unforgivable." "Yes, it was. But I need you to understand that it wasn't about the money, not for me." "No, what was it about?" She looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. "Do you remember when we first met? At the Childhood Cancer Foundation gala?" I remembered. She'd been working as an event coordinator, trying to break into Manhattan society by managing charity events for rich people. I'd been impressed by her ambition, her intelligence, her determination to build something better for herself. "You were so confident," she continued, "so sure of yourself. You knew exactly what you wanted, and you went after it. I'd never met anyone like that." And now? Now I realized that confidence was also a kind of blindness. You were so focused on building your empire that you never saw what was happening in your own home. I felt anger rising in my chest. "Oh, you're blaming me for your affair?" "Number, I'm explaining it. You worked 18-hour days. You traveled constantly. When you were home, you were thinking about work. I felt like I was married to a ghost. So you decided to screw my brother." She flinched. "Jake paid attention to me. He listened to me. He made me feel like I mattered." "You mattered to me." "Did I? Or did I matter as an accessory? The beautiful wife who looked good at business dinners and charity galas? The trophy that proved you'd made it?" The words stung because they contained enough truth to hurt. I had been focused on work, on building the company, on proving myself worthy of my father's respect. But that didn't justify what she'd done. Even if that's true, it doesn't excuse the betrayal, the lies, the theft. You're right, it doesn't. But I need you to know that I loved you, Danny. Part of me still does. What happened with Jake? It started as attention and became affection and eventually became something I couldn't control. And the money? Jake's idea. He convinced me that you'd try to destroy us financially if you found out about the affair. He said we needed a nest egg to protect ourselves. I almost laughed. "So you stole from me to protect yourselves from me?" It sounds insane when you put it like that. It is insane, all of it. She was quiet for a long moment. "How do you do it, Danny? How do you live with what you've become?" "What have I become? Alone, angry, successful but empty. Is this really what you wanted?" I looked around my office, awards on the walls, photos from groundbreaking ceremonies and ribbon cuttings. Evidence of success, but no evidence of life. I wanted to build something lasting, something that mattered. And you did. But what's the point of building an empire if you have no one to share it with? Better to be alone than surrounded by people who are planning to destroy you. She stood up to leave. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For all of it, you deserved better." "Yes, I did." She walked to the door, then turned back. Jake's getting married to some girl he met in California. I thought you should know. Congratulations to them both. Danny, be careful. Success without connection is just another kind of failure. After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the city lights. Her words echoed in my head. Success without connection is just another kind of failure. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd won the war, but lost something more important in the process. But then I remembered the feeling of standing on that rooftop 2 years ago, watching my life get stolen while everyone applauded. I remembered the photos of them together, the hotel receipts, the stolen money. I remembered the humiliation, the betrayal, the way they'd looked at me like I was an obstacle to be removed. Number, I'd made the right choice. Some people deserved to be alone if the alternative was being surrounded by snakes. 3 months later, I was in Chicago closing a deal when Tommy called with news that changed everything. Danny, you need to sit down. I'm in a meeting, Tommy. Make it quick. Jake's dead. The words hit me like a physical blow. I excused myself from the conference room and stepped into the hallway. What happened? Car accident. Head-on collision with a drunk driver. He died instantly. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, no sense of closure. Just emptiness. Yeah, when's the funeral? Saturday. Your dad wants to know if you're coming. I thought about it. Jake had been my brother for 38 years, and my enemy for 2. Did blood trump betrayal? Did end erase the damage he'd done? I'll be there. The funeral was held at St. Patrick's Cathedral, the same church where Jake and I had been altar boys as kids. Dad looked older, frailer, like Jake's passing had taken something essential out of him. Sarah was there too, sitting in the back, crying quietly. I stood at the graveside as they lowered my brother into the ground, listening to the priest talk about forgiveness and redemption and the mysteries of God's plan. Standard funeral nonsense, but it made me think about my own mortality, my own legacy. What would people say at my funeral? That I'd been successful? That I'd built an empire? That I'd gotten revenge on the people who'd wronged me? None of that seemed particularly meaningful when you were looking at it from the perspective of a grave. After the service, Dad approached me. He looked every one of his 74 years. Thank you for coming. He was my brother. He made mistakes, Danny. We all did, but he didn't deserve to die. No, he didn't. We stood there for a moment. 2 men who'd shared a name and a business, but never really understood each other. I have cancer, Dad said quietly. Pancreatic. 6 months, maybe less. The news should have shocked me, but somehow it didn't. Dad had always been larger than life, invincible, eternal. But everyone dies eventually, even kings. I'm sorry. I've been thinking about legacy lately, about what I'm leaving behind. The company will be yours when I'm gone, all of it. But I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. What mistakes? Choosing success over family. Choosing pride over love. Choosing to be feared instead of respected. He turned to look at Jake's grave. I was wrong about him. Wrong about you. Jake had charm, but you had substance. Jake had connections, but you had vision. I let my own prejudices blind me to your worth. It's too late for apologies, Dad. I know, but it's not too late for you to choose a different path. Don't end up like me, Danny. Successful and alone and full of regrets. He walked away, leaning heavily on his cane, leaving me standing by my brother's grave with a choice to make. Dad died 4 months later, quietly in his sleep. I was with him at the end, holding his hand in the same hospital where I'd been born 40 years earlier. His last words were an apology for the rooftop, for choosing Jake over me, for not seeing what was right in front of him. I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because carrying anger was exhausting, and I'd been tired for a very long time. The funeral was larger than Jake's. Dad had been a presence in the city for 50 years, and people came to pay their respects. Politicians, business leaders, society types who remembered him from better days. I stood at the podium and gave a eulogy that focused on his accomplishments rather than his failures. It seemed like the right thing to do. Afterward, at the reading of the will, I inherited everything. The remaining shares of Blackstone Properties, the house in the Hamptons, the apartment on Fifth Avenue, a stock portfolio worth $100 million. I was now the sole owner of an empire that employed 3,000 people and was worth close to $1 billion. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt empty. The changes started small. I began leaving the office at 7 instead of 10. I started taking weekends off. I hired an assistant CEO to handle day-to-day operations while I focused on long-term strategy. Tommy noticed first. "You okay, boss? You seem different." Different how? Less angry, more thoughtful. Like you're thinking about something besides the next deal. He was right. I was thinking about Sarah's words, Dad's deathbed advice, the gradual realization that I'd spent 20 years building a monument to my own ambition, and it had left me with everything I'd thought I wanted and nothing I actually needed. I started dating again. Not seriously, but consistently. I joined a gym, took up golf, bought a boat. I was trying to figure out how to live a life instead of just building a business. 6 months after Dad's end, I got a call from an unexpected source. Jennifer Walsh, the private investigator who'd helped me destroy Jake and Sarah. "Danny, I need to see you. There's something you need to know about your brother's accident." We met at the same diner in Queens where Tommy and I had planned my comeback 2 years earlier. Jennifer looked troubled, which was unusual for someone who'd spent 20 years investigating corporate fraud. "What did you find?" She slid a manila folder across the table. "Police reports from Jake's accident, toxicology results, witness statements." I pulled some strings to get access to the files. I opened the folder and read through the documents. Says here, he was sober. The other driver was drunk. Keep reading. I found what she was talking about on page 4 of the police report. Brake failure? That's what eliminated him, Danny, not the collision. His brakes failed going down a hill, and he couldn't stop before hitting the drunk driver head-on. Brakes fail sometimes. Cars aren't perfect. No, they don't. Not on 6-month-old Porsches with full maintenance records. I had a mechanic friend examine the wreckage. The brake lines had been cut. The words hit me like ice water. Are you saying someone eliminated my brother? I'm saying someone tampered with his car, and he died as a result. Whether they intended to eliminate him or just scare him, I can't say. I stared at the photos of the wreckage, trying to process what she was telling me. Who would want to eliminate Jake? That's what I was hoping you could tell me. Your brother made a lot of enemies in the past couple of years. Investors he'd defrauded. Business partners he'd betrayed. Maybe even someone connected to the family business. The implication hung in the air between us. You think I did it. I think you had motive and means and opportunity. I also think you're too smart to cut brake lines when you could destroy someone financially instead. She was right about that. If I'd wanted Jake dead, I wouldn't have used such a crude method. But someone had. Someone who'd wanted my brother gone permanently. What do you want me to do with this information? That's up to you. The police closed the case as vehicular manslaughter against the drunk driver. No one's looking for Jake's butcher because, officially, there isn't one. I closed the folder and slid it back to her. Then that's how it stays. Danny. Jake made his choices. He betrayed people, stole money, destroyed relationships. If someone decided to make him pay for that, it's not my responsibility to get them justice. Even if it was homicide? Even then. But that night, alone in my penthouse, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Someone had eliminated my brother. Someone who'd known about his schedule, his routines, his car. Someone with access and motivation and the stomach for violence. The list of suspects was longer than I'd expected. I spent the next 2 weeks conducting my own investigation. Quietly, carefully, using the same techniques I'd learned during my corporate warfare with Jake. I tracked his movements in the weeks before his end, identified people he'd been meeting with, looked for patterns. What I found surprised me. Jake hadn't been as successful in California as I'd thought. His new company was struggling, bleeding money, on the verge of bankruptcy. He'd been desperate for capital, reaching out to increasingly questionable investors, making promises he couldn't keep. One name kept appearing in his phone records, Vincent Torino, a construction contractor with alleged mob connections, who'd been trying to break in the legitimate development business. Jake had borrowed $2 million from Torino 6 months before his passing, using his engagement ring and car as collateral. According to bank records, Jake had defaulted on the loan the week before he died. I found Torino at a construction site in Queens, supervising the installation of concrete foundations. He was a big man, late 50s, with the kind of hands that looked like they'd been breaking things for decades. Vincent Torino? He looked up from his clipboard. Who's asking? Danny Blackstone, Jake's brother. His expression didn't change, but I saw his workers moving closer, forming a loose circle around us. Sorry for your loss. Jake was a good kid, good enough to lend him $2 million. Business is business. Sometimes people pay, sometimes they don't. And sometimes their brakes fail. Torino studied me for a long moment. You wearing a wire, Blackstone? No. Smart man. Jake wasn't so smart. Came to me with big plans, big promises. Said he could get me into the high-end development game, introduce me to the right people, help me clean up my reputation. But he couldn't deliver. Kid couldn't deliver a pizza. No connections, no credibility, no money. Just a pretty face and a famous last name that turned out to be worthless. So you eliminated him. Torino laughed. You watch too many movies. I don't eliminate people over $2 million. That's insurance money. Besides, Jake was worth more to me alive and desperate than dead and gone. He was right. Eliminating Jake would have eliminated any chance of recovering the money. But if Torino hadn't done it, who had? You got any idea who might have wanted your brother dead? Half the city, apparently. Yeah, well, join the club. Jake burned a lot of bridges in his short life. But if I had to guess, I'd look closer to home. What do you mean? Kid was scared the last time I saw him. Really scared. Not about money, about something else. Said his family was dangerous, that he'd made enemies he couldn't handle. When was this? 2 days before he died. He came here begging for more time, offering to sign over his car, his watch, whatever he had. But he kept looking over his shoulder like someone was following him. I left the construction site with more questions than answers. If Torino was telling the truth, Jake had been afraid of someone in the family. But who? Dad was dying. I was 3,000 miles away. Sarah had no access to cars or mechanics or the kind of connections needed for homicide, unless I flew back to New York that night and went straight to my office. If someone in the family had wanted Jake dead, there would be evidence. Financial records, phone calls, travel receipts, something that would point to a butcher. I spent the weekend going through every file, every document, every piece of communication related to Jake's passing. What I found changed everything. 3 days before Jake died, someone had wired $50,000 from a Blackstone Properties account to a garage in Los Angeles. The same garage where Jake had his Porsche serviced. The wire had been authorized by someone with executive access to company accounts. Someone who knew Jake's routines and had the technical knowledge to arrange an accident that would look like mechanical failure. The authorization code belonged to Tommy Ricci, my oldest friend, my most loyal employee, the one person I'd trusted completely throughout everything that had happened. Tommy had eliminated my brother. I sat in my office staring at the wire transfer receipt, trying to understand why. Tommy had never shown any particular animosity toward Jake. If anything, he'd seemed relieved when Jake was removed from power. Why would he commit homicide when the corporate solution had already worked? Unless it wasn't about the company. Unless it was personal. I pulled Tommy's file and went through it carefully. 15 years of employment records, performance reviews, personal information. He'd grown up in Queens, same as me. Married his high school sweetheart, divorced 5 years later, no children, no family. His whole life had been the company, the construction crews, the work we'd built together. Then I found it, buried in his personal emergency contact information from 8 years ago. Jennifer Ricci's sister, and a phone number that looked familiar. I cross-referenced the number with my private investigator files and felt my blood turn to ice. Jennifer Ricci was Jennifer Walsh, the private investigator who'd helped me destroy Jake. Tommy's sister. I'd been played. From the beginning, from the very first moment I'd hired Jennifer to investigate Jake's affair, I'd been manipulated by someone who'd had access to all my plans, all my strategies, all my secrets. But why? What did Tommy gain by destroying Jake? And why eliminate him when the corporate revenge had already succeeded? I called Jennifer's number. She answered on the second ring. Hello, Danny. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Why? Because Jake hurt me in a way I'll never forget 12 years ago. Because he destroyed my marriage, my career, my life. Because he was a hunter who used his family name and his money to get away with things that would have landed anyone else in prison. The words hit me like physical blows. Jake hurt you? At a company Christmas party. I was 26, newly married, working as a photographer for corporate events. Jake cornered me in a supply closet, told me that if I didn't cooperate, he'd make sure I never worked in the city again. I felt sick. Like, why didn't you report it? I did. To HR, to the police, to anyone who would listen. But Jake had lawyers and connections and a family name that opened doors, while mine got them slammed shut. The case was dropped. I was blacklisted. My husband left me because he couldn't handle the publicity. Tommy knew? Tommy's been planning Jake's end for 12 years. We both have. But we needed the right opportunity, the right cover story. When you hired me to investigate Jake's affair, we realized we could use your revenge as a smokescreen for our own. I slumped in my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd done. The brake lines? Tommy's idea. He knew cars, knew Jake's schedule, knew how to make it look like an accident. Clean, simple, untraceable. Except you left evidence, the wire transfer. We left evidence where only you would find it. Because we wanted you to know the truth eventually. Jake was a rapist and a thief and a liar, and the world is better without him. But you deserve to know why. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark for a long time, trying to process everything I'd learned. My brother was dead. My oldest friend was a butcher. My private investigator was a sufferer, seeking justice through homicide, and I was the one who'd made it all possible. If I hadn't hired Jennifer to investigate Jake, if I hadn't given Tommy access to company accounts, if I hadn't created the chaos that provided cover for homicide, Jake would still be alive. I was complicit in my brother's passing. I never turned Tommy in, never reported what I'd learned to the police, never sought justice for Jake's homicide. Because Jennifer was right. The world was better without him. Over the next year, I learned more about Jake's crimes. Other women came forward, quietly, privately, sharing stories of attack and intimidation that painted a picture of a hunter who'd used his family name as a shield. The hotel receipts I'd found weren't just evidence of an affair with Sarah. They were evidence of a pattern of misuse that had gone on for years. I established a fund for his sufferers, anonymous, untraceable, funded through shell companies that couldn't be connected back to me. It wasn't justice, but it was something. Tommy and I never spoke about what had happened. He continued running construction operations. I continued running the company, and we both pretended that nothing had changed, but everything had changed. The easy friendship we'd shared was gone, replaced by a careful professional relationship built on shared secrets and mutual complicity. Sarah remarried 2 years later, to a doctor in Boston who'd never heard of the Blackstone family or our corporate wars. I sent her a wedding gift, a check for $1 million with a note that read, "For a fresh start." She never cashed it. I never married again, never had children, never built the kind of personal relationships that require trust and vulnerability and the willingness to be hurt. But I did learn to live with myself, to accept that justice and revenge and morality were more complicated than I'd ever imagined, to understand that sometimes the people we love are capable of terrible things, and sometimes the people we trust are capable of worse. 5 years after Jake's passing, Blackstone Properties was the largest development company on the East Coast. I was 45 years old, worth more than $1 billion, and finally at peace with the choices I'd made. I was in my office late one Friday evening when Linda knocked on my door. "Mr. Blackstone, there's someone here to see you. I don't have any appointments scheduled. She says it's personal. Says her name is Jennifer Walsh." Jennifer walked into my office looking older but more settled than when I'd last seen her. She wore a simple black dress and no jewelry except a wedding ring. "Hello, Danny." Jennifer. Or should I say Jennifer Ricci? Walsh is my married name. My second marriage. To a good man who knows the truth about everything and loves me anyway. She sat down in the chair across from my desk. The same chair where Sarah had sat years earlier when she tried to explain her betrayal. "Then I wanted to thank you for not turning us in." What would have been the point? Jake was gone. Justice was served. Justice? Is that what you call it? I considered the question. Justice, revenge, vigilante homicide. Call it whatever you want. Jake hurt people and got away with it for years. You and Tommy made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. And you're okay with that? I'm okay with the fact that our rapist is dead and his sufferers can sleep at night. Everything else is complicated. She nodded. Tommy's retiring next month. He wanted you to know that he's grateful for everything you've done for him, but he thinks it's time to step away. Where will he go? Florida. He bought a boat. Plans to spend his retirement fishing and trying to forget the past 20 years? Tell him he'll always have a place here if he changes his mind. I will. And Danny? For what it's worth, I think you're a good man who got caught up in a bad situation. Don't let what happened with Jake define the rest of your life. After she left, I poured myself a whiskey and stood at the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The city had changed dramatically in the 15 years since I'd started the company, but the view from my office remained spectacular. I thought about Jake, about Tommy, about the choices we'd all made and the prices we'd all paid. I thought about Sarah's warning that success without connection was just another kind of failure. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had built an empire at the cost of my humanity. But I'd also built something lasting, something that employed thousands of people and created homes for families and contributed to the economic life of the city. That had to count for something. 10 years later, I stood on another rooftop, this one overlooking Central Park, watching my company's latest development take shape against the skyline. Blackstone Properties had just completed its largest project ever, a mixed-use complex that included affordable housing, retail space, and a community center. It was the kind of project Jake would have mocked as bleeding heart nonsense, but it was also the kind of project that made me proud to put my name on a building. I was 55 years old, still wealthy beyond imagination, still successful beyond my wildest dreams. But I was no longer angry. The rage that had sustained me through the corporate wars and family betrayals had finally burned itself out, replaced by something more sustainable: purpose. The company would survive me. The buildings would outlast me. The communities we'd helped create would continue long after my name was forgotten. That was legacy enough. I finished my whiskey and headed home to the penthouse that no longer felt like a museum. I'd filled it with books and art and comfortable furniture. I'd hired a housekeeper who cooked dinner and asked about my day. I'd learned to live alone without being lonely. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I was a young man, desperate to prove myself worthy of love and respect. But it was a good life, an honest life, a life I could be proud of when my time came to join Dad and Jake in whatever came after. The elevator opened on the ground floor and I walked out into the Manhattan night, another businessman heading home after another long day. No one recognized me. No one cared who I was or what I'd built or what I'd lost along the way. I was just another guy in an expensive suit, carrying the weight of his choices and the knowledge that sometimes the price of winning is everything you thought you were fighting for. But that's the thing about empire building. You don't do it for the empire, you do it to prove you can. And once you've proven it, you get to decide what to do with what you've built. I decided to build something worth leaving behind.